Hello, family. Hope you're all doing well. I received a question recently, and the question was, how can one acknowledge all the suffering that is being experienced in the world and not be overwhelmed by that suffering, not feel depressed from acknowledging all that suffering? And what comes to mind is a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's not going to be word for word because it's just based on my memory, but someone asked him this same question, and he said it's important that we don't allow the suffering of the world to overwhelm us and cause us to suffer, because then we're not going to be able to help. So if we're suffering so much to the point that we, are incapacitated and depressed and unable to do anything, how are we really going to help the situation? We're really just adding on to the suffering of the world. And so it's important for us to heal our own suffering, to transform our own suffering into peace, into freedom, into joy, so that we can show up with that energy and contribute that to the whole, to the collective. So how do we do that? How do we experience peace when there is all of this suffering? It's not selfish to focus on your happiness. And it doesn't mean that we should ignore everything that's happening in the world, but we have to be able to take care of our own happiness and our own state of mind, our own state of being, so that we can help, so that we can experience, peace in ourselves. We don't have to allow all that's happening in the world to cause us to suffer. And it's good if we learn how to experience all of this that's happening without it causing us to suffer. And so by focusing on our own peace, by focusing on accepting the situation that's happening in the world, but learning to make peace with it, that's how we can show up with that energy of peace and acceptance and unconditional love. And that's really what's going to contribute to a greater world, because we're so interconnected. And all that's happening in the world right now, all of the environmental destruction, all of the pollution, all of the violence and war and poverty, this is all the result of human activity. It's from human actions, and our actions stem from our thinking and ways of perceiving. And so the way that we change how we behave and act on the earth is by changing our perception, changing how we relate to the earth, how we think about the earth and about ourselves and our relationship to earth. And so it starts with us. If we are experiencing suffering, how can we help to change the suffering on earth? We have to learn how to experience peace within ourselves. And there's a lot of ways, a lot of different techniques and methods and things that you can do to help process your emotions and experience peace. But really, it's allowing yourself to feel, allowing yourself to really be with these emotions, to really be with yourself, to look within. We have such a tendency in our culture and our society to suppress and repress our emotions, and then they just bottle up, and then we get triggered and we lash out at other people and blame things outside of ourselves for the emotions that we feel. But if you or I, or if we are experiencing any emotion, any feelings, it's our own stuff. It's stuff that we have to acknowledge within ourselves. So what helps me to process some of these emotions when they come up, because I know, if you're really sitting with yourself and you've got a lot that you're sitting with, it can be overwhelming and it can be scary to really go to those places within ourselves. And so what I recommend or encourage is to offer yourself your breath, to offer yourself your love. So to sit down and breathe and feel, and whatever comes up, breathe with it. And breathe it in. If there's pain, if there's suffering, misery, depression, breathe it in and feel those feelings and allow them to be there for however long they need to be. And simply by allowing them and accepting them, they will begin to transform. Because a lot of, you may have heard this saying before, what you resist persists. When you push against something, you're suppressing your emotions. It's just keeping them within you. You're pushing them down. You're not really processing them or transforming them in any way. And so when you allow them to be, that radical acceptance, that transforming of your relationship to your emotions, that really gives them the space to be felt, to be seen, and then to be transformed and to move on their own. There's not really anything you have to do except for just be willing to be with those feelings. And to, like I said, breathe with them, breathe them in, and offer them your love, offer yourself unconditional love. One of the ways that I think of this unconditional love is like the love that a loving mother gives to a newborn child. And I understand not all mothers, unfortunately, are loving to their children, but majority of them are, or hopefully they are, and it's sort of just an archetype, that loving mother. So think of yourself as that loving, compassionate mother, and your emotions as that inner child, or that newborn child, and offer that quality of love towards yourself, so that when you're feeling that pain, when you're feeling anger or frustration or sadness or whatever it is, you create a space for it to be. You're not pushing it away. You're not saying, no, I don't want this. You're not trying to change it at all. You're saying yes to it. You're acknowledging it, you're accepting it, and you're offering it that love and that space to be, and that is what will transform it. So by being more mindful, by being more present with ourselves and with our emotions, we begin to transform them. We begin to see into the causes of what causes us to suffer, and into the causes of our happiness, and being able to identify ways of being, ways of thinking that lead to joy and peace, and ways that lead to chaos and disharmony. But it really comes down to being aware of ourselves and taking responsibility for what we experience within ourselves. And it's such a strange thing. It might seem like focusing on yourself instead of addressing things out externally, immediately. It might seem like it's counterintuitive in a way. But if you think of what Einstein said, he said you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. So the current level of thinking that we have collectively is what's creating all of these problems. And so we have to transform those. And to do so, we have to transform our way of thinking. We have to transform our own individual perception and way of being, and then show up with that transformed way of being, and that will ripple out into society and start to transform everything else. If we can change our perception, then we can change our thinking, we can change our actions, and we can change the ways that we affect life. And that's what needs to happen on a collective level. And so coming back to the original question, how does one acknowledge all this suffering that we're experiencing collectively and not get so overwhelmed and depressed by it? Well, feel it, feel that suffering, acknowledge that there is a lot of suffering, and acknowledge that there's suffering within yourself too. And start there. Start with your own suffering. Start with healing those wounds within yourself and making peace with them, and making peace with the situation on earth. And when we make peace with ourselves, then we can show up with that energy of peace and compassion, and that is how we should show up to the situation, or how we can show up to the situation, with that love and with that peace. And that's really what's going to help transform it. Because if we're showing up with more pain and more anger and more fear and more frustration, that energy is not really going to help. We need to show up with peace, with love, compassion, and a willingness to offer ourselves, to offer our hands, to hold space for the pain that's being experienced collectively. And how can we hold space for the collective pain if we can't hold space for our own pain? So I really think it comes back to ourselves. And it's a bit of a polarity in a way, because we don't want to be inactive or ignore things that are happening. Of course, if you have the ability to act in ways that contribute to more harmonious living, then we should do so. But we must also acknowledge what's going on within us and how that affects our actions on an individual level and on a collective level. So I know this question, it's a really good one, because it's really relevant with all the suffering that's happening in the world. When you start opening your heart in your mind and your eyes and starting to see all that we're experiencing, it can be overwhelming. But take a moment to breathe and realize you don't have to fix everything right away. It's not your sole responsibility to change everything. start with changing yourself, and then let's figure out ways that we can come together. Let's figure out ways that we can all change this collective situation. I'm really open to hearing any ideas or any of your perspectives that you have to share. So if you have anything you'd like to share, please comment it. But I hope this was helpful for anyone that's experiencing or wondering the same question. We have to find ways to transform our individual suffering so that we can experience peace, and then we can bring that energy of peace into the world. And that's really what will transform the situation. So much love.